Hi, I'm JB Jones,
And I'm Bella Naiman.
and we're the co-founders of NYC Jewelry Week. We are excited to welcome you to our 6th year New York City Jewelry Week 2023.
Welcome to our virtual talks program. On our YouTube channel, you'll get to enjoy incredible content that we've put together for you with the theme of iconography, looking at the past, present, and future of jewelry.
You can see the full schedule on our website at nycjewelryweek.com, and we invite you to explore all the programs there. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Well, hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining me today. My name is Rosena Sammi, and I'm the founder of the boutique, The Jewelry Edit. One of our missions is to elevate diverse voices in the industry. So I am thrilled to have had the opportunity to assemble this incredible panel today, Icons in Indian Jewelry. And I really couldn't have asked for three more impressive people to speak on this subject. You know, India for so long has been just has played such a important role in the jewelry landscape. India has had a profound and enduring impact on all the jewelry we enjoy today. And I'm excited to introduce three people who can speak to that and really share some of their storytelling and insight and passion on this subject. First, we have Usha Balakrishnan, the preeminent historian when it comes to all things Indian jewelry. Usha is joining us from Mumbai. She's the author of numerous books, including Munu, Vision and Passion. And we, of course, will get to that a little bit later. But thank you, Usha, for joining us.
Thank you, Rosena, for having me.
Next, we have Siddharth Kasliwal, who is, of course, a designer in his own right, but also part of the incredible legacy of Gem Palace out of Jaipur. You can't really speak about icons in Indian jewelry without mentioning your father, Munu. And of course, you have continued his incredible tradition of craftsmanship and design, and also charisma and great storytelling. So I'm excited for you to add your insight today.
Thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure.
And we, of course, lastly have Priyanka Khanna, who's joining us from Mumbai, who has her finger on the pulse on all things Indian fashion. Priyanka spent over 15 years as the fashion features director of Vogue India. She's an author, and more recently was part of the incredible team that put on the exhibit India in Fashion, curated by Hamish Bowles. I know, Priyanka, you were integral to helping that come together, and congratulations. That was an incredible feat, and I'm excited for you to share some of the background and what you learned from that experience.
Thank you, Rosena. So happy to be here and always lovely speaking with you.
Great. Well, thank you. So, let's just jump right in. My goal today is really to bring India from behind the curtain to front and center. India has had, as I mentioned, just such an impact on design and the jewelry landscape at large. Sometimes that's lost on people. And so I want today to share some of the history and the impact that India design has had. I mean, I couldn't ask for a better starting point than you, Usha, as you can maybe speak to some of the historical impact and the historical figures that have impacted Indian jewelry design. So perhaps, it's part of our DNA. So this is a bit of a hard question, but maybe you can go back to the origin of India's love affair with jewelry.
Oh, that goes back 3,000, 5,000 years. We have a continuity of jewelry tradition, a love of adornment that starts somewhere in 3,000 years before the Common Era. And I think it's very vibrant and continues till today. India was the gem bazaar of the world for well on 2,000 years. We supplied the world with diamonds. India was the home of diamonds. And even today, I think the largest number of diamonds that are cut and polished, supplying it to the world, to customers around the world, comes from India. Gemstones flowed into India, whether it was rubies from Burma and Sri Lanka, sapphires from Kashmir and Afghanistan, emeralds originally from Egypt, from what was known as the Cleopatra mines, and then from Colombia and South America, pearls from Basra. Everybody flocked to India to buy gemstones. And because of that, a lot of this went primarily into Europe, especially during the Renaissance. But even before the Renaissance, every Roman ring that is set with the diamond came from India.
Wow.
You see a lot of those rings in museums today around the world. And especially during the Renaissance, because of the traffic, the trade between India and Europe was so vibrant, was in such a large scale that there were a lot of design influences that was actually passing back and forth. It wasn't a one-way journey. A lot of influences came from Europe into India that endure even till today. For example, filigree and granulation. Later on, the art of filigree that was introduced by the Portuguese. Enameling, what we know as meenakari in India today, came into India from Europe. And in turn, India, all the maisons, all the grand joailliers of Paris took inspiration from India. And I think that's an inspiration that continues till today. Absolutely. Whether, it is motifs like the paisley, the peacock feather, or the tassel that was transformed into the sautoir that became so famous in the late 19th century. So a lot of these interactions was happening. It just went back and forth continuously over 2,000 years.
Absolutely. And I think you've touched on a really important point that India was really at the epicenter of so much that was happening. And as a result, I think the craftsmanship that you see in India is second to none. And of course, your family has played such an important role in the legacy of that craftsmanship and continuing it through to today. Maybe you can speak a little bit to the origin of Gem Palace and all that craftsmanship that we get to see and enjoy.
Yeah. So, firstly, I would like to say I'm very fortunate and take great pride and joy to be part of the family who has had such an remarkable history, because we are one of the oldest jewelers in India. My forefathers they migrated from Agra to now what is called Jaipur, which was founded by Sawai Jai Singh in 1727. So our family, it was originally in Agra, and on the invitation of the Maharaja of Jaipur at that time, my forefathers came in because Jaipur was being found as a city of culture and art. And they had sent invitation to the scholars, to the architects, the best stone cutters, enamelers, and everyone. Like, as you would know, the Jantar Mantar was made in Jaipur. So Jaipur was actually built as a city of, I would say, like genius craftsmen and skilled artisans. So my forefathers had come to Jaipur, and this was in early 1700s. We only established Gem Palace in 1852, and we worked out of the palace walls, which is the city palace, and only moved out to the present location, which has already been over 100 years at MI Road in Jaipur. So, another thing, I'm the 9th generation of the family, which is running the Gem Palace. And I would say we are very fortunate that our craftsmen are also from multi-generation. So it is really unskilled that is being passed from father to son. And it's a really beautiful transition of how it is done. And like my great-grandfather passed on to my grandfather, and then my father. So I just feel this is why you feel the difference of, in the Gem Palace piece. And it's basically the past and present being melded into one, just because of the history that our family has. And also, I would say we are one of the only vertically integrated organization, which is right from mining of gemstones, which was the case during my grandfather's time, not anymore, but mining of gemstones to cutting and polishing, to designing and the final execution of piece to retailing, it all happens under one roof.
Yes.
So that's a very rare characteristic for any business to have in today's time.
Yeah, and I love that having visited your beautiful store in Jaipur, you still embody that history. You feel it as soon as you walk through the doors. And I think that's what, one of the things Gem Palace has done so successfully is really, as you say, meld that history because you feel it. And you feel it in the piece and the design. And I love that you've been able to do that. I think it's hard for brands to do that and to keep that as part of the DNA when there are so many other influences in the jewelry world happening. So Priyanka, I'd love your sort of more modern take. India's love affair with jewelry, we've heard, has lasted through many generations. How do you see that translating through to today?
So, I think one of the most interesting things is the fact that the younger generations now, they don't want something called locker jewelry, right? Our parents, grandparents all collected jewelry because of its value, and it was kept in a bank locker and, only taken out on special occasions. The younger generation don't want that anymore. They want to be able to wear their pieces, I think, and the pandemic just kind of push that along because nobody could dress up, right? Nobody could go out and nobody could wear all their beautiful jewelry. So I think one of the biggest changes has been that. So for the younger generation, of course, value is always important. We are a very value conscious culture and a very value conscious society. But also now it's the design and the storytelling behind it, right? It is about what does the brand stand for? What is their ethos? Is there a provenance? Is there a legacy? How are they supporting, the craftsperson going forward? How are they being conscious in the mining of, their stones? All of that sort of comes together. Siddharth was saying how he has generations of craftsmen. That is so important now in keeping our crafts alive across all sectors, not only jewelry, correct? Because the younger generation of craftsmen don't necessarily want to get into what their fathers did. They see opportunities elsewhere. And so I think a lot of consumers are actually questioning that. They're questioning the brands they want to invest in because they want to know what's going on at the back end as much as they want to see the piece. And I think what's has come to the fore is design is so important. And so the designers and the jewelers who are standing out are the ones who really are focusing on bringing a really strong visual syntax and language to the forefront. And, the idea now that this is precious jewelry, but it's not worn in a precious manner, right? It's worn like your favorite diamond set could be worn with, a t-shirt and a pair of jeans as much as it could be worn with a lehenga or a sari. So I think that's really the change that's happened in the consumer. And, having spent 15 years at Vogue and even now, it's so interesting to see how the tastes are evolving and how that really has been brought on over the last few years.
I think it's also really interesting because you're obviously there in India and then I'm probably perhaps part of the diaspora, right? So to see those differences, because I think, forever South Asians have loved to dress up. We may not take it to the Mughal standards, but we certainly love a lot of jewelry. Have you seen that change at all?
No, I haven't. In fact, I've seen them wear it in a different way. So for example, like I said, you'll have the bride who wear a very big piece. And I think Siddharth can reiterate that. They will wear, instead of wearing one single big piece, they'll wear 3 layers, which that they can then break up and wear otherwise, so they wear it on their bridal day and then they'll change it around. And, Rosena and I worked on the India edit for her website, the jewelry edit. And one of our reasons which I wanted to really push in designers was because I thought there's so much talent and new storytelling. So I think we haven't changed our love for jewelry. We've just changed how often we wear it and how we wear it. I think that's really it. And you ask any of the girls, and I see them on a regular, I walk around and I see girls on a regular basis, right? And I'm talking, of course, about urban India. It really is interesting to see how they mix up their pieces, and how they mix up their stones. There are no rules anymore. There's no, oh, I'm only wearing gold, or I'm only wearing platinum, or I'm only wearing emeralds, or only rubies. It's all sort of mixed together in this like incredible, everyone's trying to own it and have their own visual language, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, well, I think we're confident that the love affair with jewelry has endured.
Yes.
But let's name some icons. The panel is icons in Indian jewelry. I think we all want to visualize someone. So maybe, Usha, we can start with you in terms of a historical figure that you can mention that speaks to being an icon.
Oh gosh, unlike in the West, we have so little documentation in India as far as jewelry is concerned. I think every one of our sculptures that you see is in that sense an icon, because I often say, you might see a sculpture devoid of clothes, but you'll never see a sculpture devoid of a piece of jewelry, if not more than one piece of jewelry. But if you have to distill it down into people, perhaps, the Emperor Shah Jahan, who was a great connoisseur of design, of gemstones. He is supposed to have even designed his own pieces of jewelry. He knew how to differentiate a great gemstone from an average one. He could price it. He could evaluate its value. And then as we come, further into the era of the Maharajas, so to speak, Patiala, I think nobody can beat, Bhupinder and Yadavendra Singh Patiala just for the sheer scale and quantity of jewelry, and the fact they handed it all over to Cartier and Boucheron and Van Cleef to reset it into more contemporary settings. Baroda is another one. Nizam of Hyderabad, the richest man in the world. I had the privilege of studying and documenting those jewels for the government of India.
In Delhi.
And I have to tell you, nothing does it justice. No book, no photograph can do justice to those jewels, except what you see in person. Sita Devi Baroda is another one whose name is synonymous with great jewels, a great patron of Van Cleef and Arpels. Through history, we have all these names that are associated with design, with style, never seen without jewelry. Great patrons of craftsmen. I mean, after all, if they were not great patrons, the art of jewelry manufacture would not have survived. So they were all really great patrons.
Yeah. And I love that they not only wore jewelry, they were intrinsically involved in the design and the creation, and they had great style. So it wasn't a matter of just going and buying something and wearing it. They kind of were part of that evolution of the taste and style that we see in all the figures that you mentioned. And I love that we're highlighting this, because so often you think of Paris as this epicenter of design and culture and art. And really what things that were happening in Jaipur and in different regions of India are just as incredible. And so it's so lovely to hear that and share those stories. So of course, when you think of icons of Indian jewelry, you can't go further than Mukul Kasal. And of course, his name is forever synonymous with great jewelry. And what I love about what your dad did, Siddharth, was that he really translated that mystique of Gem Palace to a broader audience. And you continue that tradition. But I'd love you to share a little bit about how he was able to do that.
Yeah, I really think that my father, like Mr. Mukul Kasal, he really had the special ability to see the stone and design at the same time. While the world was looking for a perfect stone, he always went for the imperfection in the stone. He would love to keep the old mine diamonds, which were known as the Golconda, and now the modern term is to use them as old mine. The old mine diamonds, I would say the spinels, and the emerald beads, they were kept in the most natural form. Whenever he looked at a stone, I think so, he always looked at it with he had a different ability of seeing it, how it would create the magic and the luster and the excitement when a woman wears it. And I grew up seeing him with like Usha ji had mentioned in his book, that the twinkle in his eye, because it's so true. Like every time my dad would look at a stone, he would jump up like a little kid, like a kid in a toy store. He'd be like, oh my God, this is amazing. And I can't wait to do something about it. And, so he was really attracted to the magic and luster of the stones. and he always went for that. And I would also say he, while designing, he always thought of the woman wearing it. That's how he, in America, he made the diamonds. He started the trend of wearing diamonds with jeans, or his famous thing that he called the T-shirt necklaces. He was the first person who actually, women started wearing his big Kundan Meena Polki necklace that you were talking, that the brides would wear multi-layers. New York City women started wearing it on a black T-shirt walking down Madison Avenue, you know? So he always had that joy, because he told his friends that, you know, jewelry is never supposed to be taken too seriously. Jewelry is something that brings you joy and happiness. So you shouldn't be stressed around it. You should wear it, and, you know, that joy should be radiant on your face. So growing up, seeing all these stories, seeing millions of his admirers and his friends was always like amazing for me, and a real treat and pleasure to. So I had a very different viewpoint about jewelry. I never took it like ascertaining to the value or how expensive it is, well, how many dollars. It was always measured in terms of what level of happiness that piece of jewelry is bringing to the woman who's wearing it.
Yeah, I wish more people thought like that, right? Because jewelry is very personal. It's always about a joy, a connection, not about a brand name. And I think there are different ways that you can, value things. And luxury isn't always about the dollars. It's about the experience, right?
I think, if I can just add to, what Munnuji actually did was, he took semi-precious and made it precious. I think he was the first one who did that, and remains the only one to have done that. So, stones like amethyst and moonstones, tourmalines, the way he treated them, he really elevated semi-precious to the status of precious stones. And he adapted designs, drawing inspiration from, this vast encyclopedia of Indian design. And, he just created these pieces that had such a contemporary edge to it, but not necessarily set with what India was so used to, diamonds, emeralds, rubies, sapphires, that kind of thing, but brought in these absolutely rainbow colors into his design.
Yeah, the multicolored tourmalines. And he started this line called the Mughal Contemporary Collection, which was the name given by him. And this was back in 2001, when absolutely, like, people only thought Indian jewelry was only with ruby, diamonds, and emeralds, like Ushaji mentioned. But he really created this, there was this wave of, like, when he created this line using bird earrings made with like rainbow moonstone and flowers with green tourmalines. And that's the first time, people saw so that these semi-precious stones didn't mean that they were just inexpensive stone. I really don't think so there's anything, the word cheap should be used in jewelry. There's nothing cheap. It's just relatively inexpensive compared to the precious stone. But he really treated them as precious, and the way the design, the flow of the design, the continuity, and it was just an instant hit. People wearing the Indian designs, because it didn't restrict them to only wear it at night time. You could wear it for lunch, and you could walk around during the day wearing Indian designs in a contemporary fashion.
Exactly. And I think that's what he did so well. He was able to tell those stories through jewelry that people could really connect with. So you understood the inspiration behind the design, the story he was trying to tell. And I think that's, from what I understand, one of the reasons he was so successful, that charisma and storytelling that you continue to this day really helps translate that world of Indian jewelry in a way that people in a broader audience can truly understand it. So when we're talking about icons, Priyanka, I'm going to ask you, and you again, you know what's happening right there on the ground in India. When we're speaking today of icons in Indian jewelry, whether it's design, fashion, Bollywood, maybe you can name someone who you think is having an important impact on jewelry design right now.
So I think icons is a tough word to use. I think, a Mukul Kasal and Gem Palace, of course, are in a very different league. So and I feel like that's a word used very loosely now. But there are people definitely who are having an incredible impact on jewelry and fashion and translating the Indian vocabulary in a very interesting way, and in a very global language, while still being honest and authentic to, where it's coming from. Of course, there's Hanoot Singh, who brings his lineage and his really strong Art Deco design sensibility into pieces that have really captured attention globally. There's Sabyasachi, who again has taken his language of design, which started in fashion, to jewelry and created a very strong signature style. And on the other hand, there's Viren Bhagat, who has been doing incredible work. His pieces are just beautiful. And I think from the younger lot, there's Studio Ren, who I think is bringing in a really interesting aspect, where again, their pieces, when you look at them, they're not inherently at the first glance, they don't look Indian, but they have an inherent strong craftsmanship behind them, which can only happen in a country which has generations of that skill set. So I think they're doing really incredibly interesting work, and their thought process is quite unique. So again, I don't want to use the word icons loosely, because I think those should be reserved for very few people. But I think these four are who I'm always interested to see what they're doing next, and they sort of are leading the charge in a new way for Indian design.
And I'm curious, and this is maybe more of a personal question, we look at all these historical figures that had these, incredible jewelry collections, and you are synonymous with great jewelry style. I mean, I know, Usha, you mentioned some of them earlier. Is anyone today in modern India wearing jewelry in that way?
It's a really good question.
Yes.
Okay. They are.
Yes, they are. I mean, there are people. I mean, weddings always bring them out. There's a lot of affluence in India. You see a lot of jewelry. We are the largest jewelry buying nation in the world. I think that itself speaks for itself, that there's a lot of jewelry being bought, and therefore there's a lot of jewelry being worn. I think in some sense, the historical films in Bollywood have kind of led to one big revival of interest in jewelry, whether it was Jodha Akbar or Bajirao Mastani or Padmavati. I mean, these were all films where there was a lot of jewelry, and they kind of, I think, tried to design jewelry that was relevant to that area in which the film was set. And I think even today, you do see, the important families of India coming out with beautiful, beautiful jewels.
I'm sure. And I like that you say that. I think even on the street, when you're walking around, Priyanka or Usha, as you mentioned, all women still encapsulate a desire and love for jewelry and a style and the way that they wear it, which is important and good to know for those of us in the jewelry industry. So, I touched upon earlier the impact of Indian jewelry on the wider jewelry landscape. And I really want to delve into that a little bit, because I like to connect the dots for people. I think for a lot of people walking down Madison Avenue here in New York, when you walk past some of these big heritage brands, you don't appreciate the role that India played in a lot of their evolution, whether it's stones or design. And so, Usha, maybe you can help, historically speaking, by maybe calling out a motif or a craftsmanship, craft style. You mentioned filigree or enamel work earlier, that you think India had an important impact upon. One easy one is perhaps Cartier and Tutti Frutti and their design, but I'd love you to share your insight there.
I think Bhushan is another one. Their recent new Maharaja collection that was based on the designs that they did for Patiala. But they moved away in this collection. They brought in a lot of new material, like they were using mother of pearl, rock crystal, not necessarily because the kind of diamonds that they used in the original collection is no longer available, nor is it perhaps worth that kind of investment. But the way they reimagined and reinvented that collection, I think it's very special. And if I'm not mistaken, I mean, I think Bulgari sources practically all their colored gemstones from India. I mean, it's all cut and polished in Jaipur. Even Cartier today, all their carved gemstones and tutti frutti line is still very, very an important aspect of their collection. I know they get all their diamonds from India. They're all cut and polished over here in India. But other than those big names, people like Alice Ciccolini, for example, her initial line, a lot of that enamel work was actually done in Jaipur. I think now she's kind of moved away from it, but originally it was based in Jaipur. And I think in Gem Palace, Marie-Hélène de Telac, who is also extremely well known with the colored stones, very influenced by Munuji. That influence still endures in all her collections, the way she uses semi-precious and colored gemstones. So yeah, I think, every now and then people are looking to the Orient for inspiration. Persia is no longer the inspiration that it was. The Ottoman Empire is not the inspiration it was. And therefore, India is still a great source of inspiration to designers all over the world. Even going east, I know Ganjam, for example, did a great collection by commissioning a Japanese designer based on the ikat, that was very popular in Indonesia. So they kind of developed this collection with a Japanese designer. So there's a lot of this interaction happening.
Can you speak a little bit, though, about historically how that evolved, how these bigger heritage brands came to learn or became enamored with Indian design? I think that's an interesting story.
I think it's the romance of the Orient. Late 19th century, England, of course, was always, because it was a colonial empire, there was a lot of people coming, there was a lot of movement. The French were in India, the Portuguese were in India, the Dutch were in India, the English were in India, the Italians were trading with India, the Germans were trading with India. Augsburg, which was a very big center of manufacturing in Germany in the Renaissance, the pattern books were coming to India. And a lot of the Dutch diamond cutters were actually working in India, introducing new diamond cuts, bringing their equipment and teaching the Indian diamond cutter. So there was a lot of this. And, a lot of pieces of jewelry were brought into India as stock in trade. It was portable, easy to carry, could be easily liquidated into cash. So they all brought pieces of jewelry. And, the first person that they would think of selling them to was the local jeweler, the local goldsmith, who probably took a look at this piece from Portugal or Spain or England or Italy and said, oh, look, this is something interesting. Why don't I try and copy it? And we know about gold jewelers who actually went and worked in Portuguese, who manufactured for King Michael and Queen Isabella in Portugal. And then we have, this whole, the romance with enameling, with what is known as meenakari in India. It came into India, but the Indian craftsmen learned the technique of Champlevé enamel from Limoges in France, the Champlevé from Augsburg, from Siena near Florence. All of that came, but again, reinterpreted it in his own unique Indian idiom. And even today, I think, India is the center of enameling in the world.
Absolutely. I know, and I know it takes a long time to get it done right. As a boutique who sells some of like Alice Ciccolini's jewelry and others, you have to be very patient, but it's always worth the wait.
Yes.
So let me ask about Gem Palace, and when it comes to sort of translating and understanding how your family was able to take Indian jewelry and have it walk down Madison Avenue and been worn by lots of bold-faced names. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about how that came about, and how having those well-known names wearing your jewelry, how that helped translate and showcase what you do and what impact it had.
We have many favorites, but we have been blessed with a lot of wonderful people wearing the Gem Palace, and I believe our family being very close to the Jaipur royal family was also a gateway to a lot of like world royalty coming to Jaipur and visiting the Gem Palace. I would say one of my favorite memories and my favorite person wearing Gem Palace will always be Marani Gayatri Devi, who herself was known for her radiant beauty and her sense of style and all. And I still remember she got these Golconda earrings from my father, and I often saw her wear those with like her colorful Rajasthani saris, just those Golconda earrings, just in a simple cloth setting, and would be sipping into coffee at Gem Palace and just talking about history. So, these kind of like beautiful, amazing stories when you see. So also one of the most iconic piece that was done by my grandfather, and she was for Maria Nelly, the a satwa, a famous rope of necklace with thousands of carats of rubies and pearls and emeralds, and she wore it almost every day of her life. Like you can see her being photographed. So all these like beautiful memories, and how these pieces became a part of the women's daily life, these iconic women's daily lives. So that has had quite a unique impact on our family brand's history. And I also believe the Jackie Kennedy visit to India in 1963 had the West fascination about Indian jewelry come up, because before that the Americans didn't relate to the Indian jewelry as something which was luxurious, because they just thought it was French and Italian jewelers who were known. But after Jackie Kennedy visited us in 1963, that really had a powerful impact on the Americans. Oh, we can go to Jaipur, the city of gems, and actually go and buy jewelry. And I would say in the modern times, the likes of Nicole Kidman and Rihanna wearing our jewelry. I don't know if you remember that it was the first, Priyanka, you will remember the first Vogue one where she wore it on her back, one of my dad's necklace, which created quite a ripples in India, because it was the first time an Indian jeweler was represented on the cover page of an American Vogue, and how beautifully she wore it on a backless dress. So I would say that also had a great a positive impact on the firm's history and brand.
Well, I love how you mentioned that it was the way a lot of incredible women in India wore the jewelry in an everyday sense, that it was just part of them, part of their style. And then in contrast, you have some of these bold-faced names in the US wearing it in an iconic way on the cover of a magazine. It shows the kind of the hybrid of what Gem Palace is able to do in terms of capturing people's imagination just in an everyday style, but also on the cover of the most important glossy in the world. So it's an incredible testament to what you're able to produce.
Yeah, thank you.
And so now let's talk about the India and Fashion exhibit, Priyanka, was just such an incredible accomplishment for the whole team that put that together. And I'm sure obviously it focused primarily on fashion and not on really jewelry, but I'm hoping you learned something there that you can help relate to the jewelry world in terms of what you saw, what you created, and the exhibit. And maybe for those of you who don't know, though, I think it was impossible for the world to miss this exhibit, but maybe you can give us a little bit of background on that as well.
So this exhibition was Indian fashion was curated by Hamish Bowles and then Patrick Kinmont as well, and designed by Patrick. I, had a very small role in, it was a massive undertaking over several years and through the pandemic. I came on. About a year. I was speaking to Hamish, helping him a little bit during, but I came on officially about a year before the exhibit opened. And my role was, I was sort of the liaison between the Indian designers and the Indian curation and Hamish. There was also there is also an incredible coffee table book published by Rizzoli, edited by Hamish, which I worked on with him. And I have to say, obviously, with my experience at Vogue for so many years and having been in the fashion industry and having had that front row seat, this was really an experience like no other. And I'm so grateful to Hamish and Priyatanna, my old editor of Vogue, who sort of got me involved in this. But what was really interesting, what I found interesting to see, was how it was a very balanced view, this exhibition, because Hamish, and including, when you read his editor's note in the Rizzoli book, he doesn't shy away from the fact that there was so much appropriation and exploitation also for the West from, Indian design and Indian talent. And so much was appropriated in a way where credit was not necessarily given. And I think that applies to the jewelry industry as well. I think that's something like, Usha was saying, there were so many motifs, whether it was, and techniques, whether it was meenakari or it was the cuts that have been taken from India and put in a setting and not necessarily given the right credit or the right due. So I think that was, for me, the biggest learning, was to see that balanced view as an Indian audience member too. To see the history, especially, Hamish focused a lot on chintz and muslin, and how it was such a important financial decision, during the Industrial Revolution, and how that really changed the trajectory of chintz, as a fabric. But it actually was a technique that was very integral to the Indian ecosystem at that point. So I think that for me was very, very interesting, is sort of seeing that credit is finally coming. And I think that's true world over. And I think brands as well are realizing the importance, not only of the Indian consumer, but also to give that importance to the legacy of where their designs come from.
No, I really appreciate that you mentioned that. And I think now, this is part of the reason we're doing this panel, is also to kind of pull that curtain so you can see the history and the workmanship that still goes on today. Because when you if you want to speak about fashion, you think of couture, so much of the incredible beading that we see on these gowns is done in India, right? And then I think when you have someone like Dior, right, hold their fashion show in India, it's sort of allowing India to become more of a visually, really a part of the legacy that they have been involved in. And I would love to see that happen more with jewelry. I think conversations like this and learning about the history and the important role that India has played and continues to play will help that evolve, so that maybe we can see some of that acknowledgement and some more sort of these collaborations become conversations sort of front and center rather than behind the scenes. I think everyone in the jewelry industry appreciates the role India has played. I think it would be wonderful to have consumers also better understand that. And so maybe,
I'm just going to, I want to add to that, because I think what Maria Grazia and Karishma Swali did with Dior was, kind of change the narrative. It was always made in India. We were the behind the scenes. We were the manufacturers, right? And now, the focus is shifting to designed in India, which I think is a very important shift. The fact that we're not only a manufacturing hub, we also bring, we bring a vision and we bring an idea. And I think collaborations like this across sectors will only strengthen, the ideas and the vision that we have, and take it to the world.
Absolutely. And I think, maybe the next thing I'll ask you about will help this conversation sort of flow and grow, which is sometimes think of you've all mentioned it, sort of certain motifs that we have seen throughout history in India. Now you'll see it as you walk down Madison Avenue, or, you'll see it in the bigger jewelry brands. And it's something that's sort of been important and part of our cultural language for a long time. So I'd love to maybe explore that, because I think visually making that association helps people better understand the impact that India has had. So maybe we'll start sort of historically, and we'll think of like wedding jewelry, because there's nothing like a big Indian wedding. No one can beat that. And I think Indian jewelry really represents a lot of the beautiful techniques and stones that you see in India. So maybe, Usha, you can talk about maybe a historical motif. I know I'm, for example, I'm Tamil, I'm wearing the Thali necklace. And so there's a symbolism there that you see in terms of our traditional wedding jewelry. Are there any motifs that you can speak of that continue this sort of thread of conversation?
I think a lot of them. I mean, for example, just take the nose ring. The nose ring has become so popular. It's kind of, crossed national and international borders. And, you often see people in different parts of the world piercing their nose, wearing nose rings. Another thing is, instead of just one whole board in your earlobe, they are now wearing little earrings, little danglies all along the helix of the ear. Again, that's something that you see in the villages of India even today, because in India, of course, it has a different connotation. It's not just mere adornment. It's got something to do. These are all acupressure and acupuncture points in our body. So therefore, those parts are pierced. And the moment you hang something, the weight of that piece of jewelry stimulates that point, and it kind of enhances fertility. It leads to emotional well-being. There are so many things that it plays on the emotional and physical psyche of the individual, man or woman. Men also bore their ears, wear earrings. They wear armbands, they wear toe rings, they wear bracelets. Everything has a purpose. So there is nothing in India that does not serve a purpose. It was not, and it's still, although we have lost a lot of these meanings, it was never adornment just for adornment's sake. So every piece of jewelry has a meaning. The aigrette, for example, the kalgi and the jigga, that was so much part of Indian royal attire. Today, everywhere, it's come back into fashion. I don't think there's a single Indian wedding that takes place without the bridegroom.
Can you describe that a little bit for those who aren't familiar?
Okay, so the kalgi and it's an aigrette. It's worn on the turban. It's modeled on the heron's feather. So it kind of, curves down to one side and pinned to the front center of the turban. Usually set with the most splendid gemstones in a king's treasury, because when he was sitting in for royal audience, that was the piece of jewelry that displayed his power and his might. The fact that he was the king, the Maharaja of this kingdom. That has become popular because it's kind of gone through a big revival. I think men's jewelry has really gone through, Priyanka would know that there's been a great revival in men's jewelry. Siddharth also would be able to corroborate that. They're all wearing lovely brooches. I'm seeing some beautiful brooch designs. A lot of them modeled on the jigga and the kalgi. So old designs being contemporized and adapted, maybe scaled down, maybe set with different kinds of stones. But men love to sport, are all wearing brooches. Buttons are coming back, pocket watches are coming back into fashion, men are wearing bracelets. So a lot of these things, they are kind of, it's great to see, because then you see them also going across to different parts of the world. So, and then being reinterpreted and redesigned by local jewelers, local designers in different parts of the world.
Yeah, you mentioned 2 points I want to pick up on because I think they're really interesting. One is that I think Indian men wear better jewelry than anyone else, right? And I think through history and to today, there's a certain style to the way Indian men dress and also especially wear their jewelry that I think we all appreciate. And I hope you're right that we see more of that and that's coming back. I mean, and also I think when you mentioned about wedding traditions in villages, I think, you know, what's really interesting about Indians and jewelry is no matter what your station, you could be having the biggest wedding in Mumbai or a smaller village wedding. Jewelry, whatever the value, it plays a role, right, in terms of that exchange of vows or families coming together. And I think that's an important tradition that continues and showcases how integral jewelry is to Indian culture.
Yeah.
And so, Siddharth, let me ask you, when it comes to wedding jewelry, I'm sure you have and your family have been a part of some of the biggest weddings in the world, frankly. Maybe you can touch on a few motifs or a particular wedding ensemble that you've been a part of that's really a great story.
Yeah, so I always love putting a secret motif in like wedding jewelry at the back of it. I always often believe for the couple to bring luck. It's a new beginning, and they're doing. And traditionally in Indian jewelry, the most popular motifs were the flora and fauna, like flowers, animals. What we do is we also incorporate the tree of life, which symbolizes continuity and eternal love. It's so most a lot of times the pieces are worked from the back, so only the wearer knows it. That's called the wearer's pleasure. I can show you a piece to explain that better. So it was always mostly for not what the eyes could see, but the body sees and feels as well. And that has been the ethos of Gem Palace, where often when you turn the piece, and it's not for the show purpose, it's only for the person who's wearing it, what's to feel special. For something like this, I would like for people to see who would understand better what I'm talking about. So that's one of the pieces designed by my father. What you see here is beautiful Basra pearls with these rose cut diamonds. And like Priyanka was mentioning, they would wear this with a choker, like they would like to wear it on 3 layers. And traditionally, like what you do after the wedding is you can just wear this without the 3 layers. But what makes it really special is the thing at the back.
Yeah.
That it's only for the wearer to see. So, we often have that, like in wedding jewelry, we have people who would come and ask us to, if it's an enamel piece, to write the wedding date in some form of enameling. So we'll write the wedding date in form of like vines of trees going, and that's what writes it, or the filigree work. We would incorporate the date or some special moment that they wanted, like a place that where they met, they want that, or their parents or mother's name. So there are a lot of times that we do it. And also, while we are designing wedding jewelry, it's in India, as you know, the jewelers become a part of the family. We are really involved in their family wedding, right from the day one, to like the mother's jewelry and the sister's suite, and the bride's like 3-day function suite. So it's often there is a lot of like, there has to be an absolute trust and integrity where between the two families. And we are blessed to have those kind of clients, because I always say our clients are mostly our friends, because there's been generations of friendship. Like their grandmother's jewelry was done by my grandfather, and the granddaughter has come to me. So there's this beautiful, there's this beautiful synergy of history coming back together. And we also take great care when making a piece, because my father often told me that, we come and go, but the jewelry remains forever. So it has to be perfect from all the sides because it's very carefully passed on from one generation to another. So it has to be perfect from all sides. And coming to your question about, yes, I've been fortunate enough to be a part of many incredible weddings in India and world over. But in particularly, I would like to point out to a piece that took us almost 4 years to complete it. The family had come to us in advance that they wanted, and the ideas were discussed over few months, and then the execution happened, and it was the period of collection of those incredible pearls, rose cut diamonds, and so the wedding suite comprised of this huge necklace with a headpiece and earrings with like matching bracelets. And I'm really like proud and amazed by the marvel we could pull off, because it was really like an incredible piece that was done for a Middle Eastern royal family many years ago. And that was really something that I remember fondly, how we worked on it, and it was a 4-year project. So we have even had those kind of like, fascinating stories that families go that advanced in time to be preparing for wedding jewelry.
Yeah, incredible. I'd love to see the jewelry, so I'll ask you afterwards to send me some pictures. It sounds amazing. And so, Priyanka, in today's day and age, how are you seeing the modern Indian response to different trends in wedding jewelry? Obviously, there are engagement rings. There are different ideas about, you mentioned earlier about not wanting to have all the big wedding jewelry. What are you seeing in terms of how of modern day Indians and weddings?
So I think one of the things which is incredible is, again, a resurgence of going back and taking things from your family, again, going back to the idea of provenance, and then mixing that with maybe newer pieces, which I think is really interesting. And, again, there could be cultural nuances or regional nuances. There could be something, a piece from the South that is important from one aspect of the family, and, bringing that in, which I think is really, really interesting. Again, it tells a larger story of the fact that, it's kind of like in the West, you have your something borrowed, something blue. This is the something borrowed kind of coming in. But I think it makes for a very interesting look. Again, I think the fact is that multi-use jewelry has become incredibly important. So really, it's not really about that one big piece that you're never going to see, again, till your children possibly get married. It really is about breaking it down, layering it in an interesting way, mixing gemstones, mixing materials. I think one of the things your question earlier was, what is the West take? And I think one of the things the newer generation is also looking at is the energy of gemstones. I think that's something that the West took from us. And I think the younger generation are going back into that as well maybe Siddharth and Usha can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that is, a huge movement. So I think really the mix, I think there is, there's still, it's very funny, earlier I said there are no rules, but when I think about it, there aren't on the most part. But I think for some reason, brides tend to wear for their cocktail, maybe because they tend to wear, their silhouettes tend to go a little bit Western. They tend to choose the more diamonds. And for the Indian, the actual fairas or the actual wedding ceremony, they go for more uncut, jarao, more traditionally Indian pieces. So that's something that does change up. But for the most part, I feel that's a pattern I've seen. But for me, the more interesting thing is really how to use and reuse your grandmother or your mother's or that one important piece of jewelry. And again, pieces that you can really wear over the years, that you can wear later, that you can break down. And I think what I've seen with a lot of jewelers is that they're offering options. They're offering pieces that you can add on and you can take off, according to your need, which I think is really the need of the market.
Yeah. And I love that you talked about the energy of stones, because, to take another example, people in the US are obsessed with yoga and sometimes forget that, yoga originated in India. And so it's the same thing with these sort of stones and the energy, which I think is really important. And I agree that today's customers going back to thinking about origin and energy and important influences like that outside of just a value or a brand name. And I love that about the current consumer. So let's think about, because I know we're running a little bit out of time, the future of Indian jewelry. We've obviously spoken a little bit about the history and the impact that, generations of Indians have had on the jewelry landscape. Part of preserving that story is having conversations like this, but also actually preserving the physical jewelry and the sculptures and so forth. So maybe Usha is the historian, the expert here. Can you speak a little bit to if people wanted to go and see this jewelry in India, maybe where they could see it, or what's being done within India, whether it's families or the government, to preserve this history?
Okay, I think, I wish there was a museum in India, a great gem and jewelry museum, because more than any other country in the world, we deserve to have a national gem and jewelry museum, which we don't have. We have a great collection of the Nizam of Hyderabad's jewels, which is currently in storage, but we hope when a new museum comes up in Delhi, these jewels will go on permanent exhibition. But here in Mumbai, where I live, I have curated the jewelry gallery in the museum here, the CSMBS, formerly known as the Prince of Wales Museum. In the process of setting up an enamel museum in Jaipur, which I'm curating and setting up, and we hope to open probably end of November. Other than that, families hold jewelry. Jewelry still is very, very, very personal. They don't like to share. They don't like to show. They don't like you to photograph it and publish it. It's still, very, very private jewelry collections in India, other than what you see people wearing, during their wedding or on special occasions. Our temples are the largest repository still of great Indian jewelry. And, if people time their visits to India during temple festivals, especially in South India, the deities are taken out, adorned in all their jewels. And, the mobile phone today is a great camera, and you can see, you can just click, and then, I often click, and then, I'm kind of blowing it up to see all the jewels. So the temples are the greatest repositories, but we still, unlike in the West, have not realized the importance of documenting this, the importance of publishing it, the importance of doing the research and kind of studying and doing a chronology of styles. In that sense, in the academic sense, it still hasn't received adequate attention or adequate importance. But those of us who work in the field, we continue to work, and we hope at some point in time we will be able to share a lot of this. There are a lot of exhibitions. I curated an exhibition in Moscow at the Kremlin Museum, where Munuji, an entire section was devoted to Munuji's pieces. I did an exhibition in the Paula Museum in California. So a lot of these exhibits, there's one going to be in Michigan next year. There was one in Houston a few years ago. So there are a lot of museums around the world that are doing exhibitions of Indian jewelry, showcasing their collections, borrowing from private collectors. The Indian diaspora in America, for example, has suddenly woken up and realized that, they have inherited great pieces of jewelry from their grandmothers or great grandmothers. So I'm working with people, first generation migrants into America whose children are not so interested in wearing these jewels. So they would like it to be documented, and they are really considering giving it as gifts to their local museums. So, to create interest and get the community interest, and, let the younger generation learn about these pieces, the importance of the great Indian tradition of adornment and jewelry.
That's incredible. I didn't know that. And I think that's fascinating. And I know I'm going to ask you in a second, Priyanka, because we've seen some of the money that India has now put into preserving the fashion stories when it comes to clothing. Hopefully we see that in jewelry too. But Siddharth, let me ask you a little bit about changes in the jewelry industry. And I'm going to jump right into a little bit of a controversial one, which is lab-grown versus natural diamonds. And I know we spoke a little bit about that. So sorry to put you on the spot, but I am going to ask you because that is something that I think industry-wide we're having a lot of dialogue and conversations about, and I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer. Maybe you have one, but you know, how has lab-grown diamonds influenced the Indian jewelry landscape?
You know, I'm a part of the Natural Diamond Council, so you would know my opinion would be very biased. I believe I can only speak on behalf of how my clients feel about it and the people I like discuss this with. I was in the Hong Kong jewelry show. I believe Indians as people, we really associate the idea of diamond for its value, for the beauty that it was found naturally, for to be like thousands and hundreds thousands of years how the diamond was created. And also when somebody gives you a diamond, it like a woman feels special about it because there is a part of it that the man worked hard to buy that diamond and give it to, and the whole romance behind it and all. And I still feel as Indians we are still very old school, old fashioned. So like I said, I can't speak on behalf of all Indians, but I seriously feel that it's not going to impact jewelers like us, where people are still coming to take a part of the history. And also in Gem Palace, we are known to be using old mine diamonds more than the modern diamonds. Like that was never our style, so we don't get affected by it directly. And I'm sure Usha ji will be able to like speak more about it because she has a great deal of knowledge in this field. But like, I don't know if you remember that part that our Prime Minister Modi happened to take the diamond for the American president, and a lab-grown diamond for President Biden, which I felt was quite a shocking thing for every jeweler to see, that in India, where the diamond exports are a big part of the country's progress, it creates millions and millions of jobs in Surat, and for that our Prime Minister to be giving that I think so it took the nation by a little bit of a shock. But times are challenging for the diamond industry for sure, and I would just say I'm not an expert in this field, but only we can just wait and watch. But I could just say that as an Indian, I would still feel people are very old school and old fashioned. They would not be wearing lab grown diamonds, but I could be wrong. So
No, yeah. Well, I wanted to ask, I think it's interesting. I think India generally, some of the concepts that have taken off here in the West, whether it's borrowing jewelry, I don't know if that will translate to an Indian audience. People want
because Indians take pride.
Yeah.
It's a matter of pride. People never borrow jewelry in India, and you take a lot of pride wearing your grandmother and your mother's jewelry, but it's not the concept like America where they would borrow the jewelry and go to events or weddings especially. Right. So that's what I feel like. Lab-grown diamonds may and will probably work in America, but I think so it would be challenging for lab-grown diamonds to have popularity in Indian people. That's what I feel.
And how about just generally in terms of craftsmanship? Obviously, you pride yourself on all of this generations of artisans that work with you and have carried on family traditions. How have you been impacted by some of the modern techniques that are available now?
Yeah. So, so back at Gem Palace, I would say our biggest challenge is the sustainability of craftsmanship, to keep this art and skilled craftsmen skills that I said is passed on from a father to son, and or from a guru to a scholar, is in today's day of science and technology, it is definitely challenging to preserve these techniques. And as Gem Palace, and personally under the patronage of my dad, And we have this school of artisans that we constantly motivate them to be doing this because of the IT industry. Like, their kids don't want to join the business. They want to get into an app. They would like to create an app and get into that. You would have heard of the 3D printing, where they just print, they could like make a mold of a ring and there is no work done. So in these challenging times, it is definitely very difficult for us, but my idea is to continue preserving these skilled arts, which has been there for centuries in India. Otherwise, it would be lost in the pages of history. That at one point India did that. That's already happened in China, as you know. So that's why, just to show you an example, I wanted to talk about this. So apart from the enameling part, there is something which is the inlay technique, and which is something that my dad really wanted, because it's a very uh, patience and painstaking craftsmanship that you cannot rush through it. So I'll show you a little ring which you see here. In this ring, you see 967 pieces of rubies have been put without using, and that's an old Golconda diamond. So this kind of workmanship is being almost getting extinct because people don't have patience. And I, like my dad always used to say, you need real patience and passion to be doing this work. So this is what I'm focused in, like trying to do this. And as Usha ji would be able to say, like, this kind of work was done on daggers, and so it's like where the most part of the youth of an artisan would be spent in making one piece of jewelry, and he would give it as a gift to the Maharaja. In return, he'll get a piece of land or 100 cows. That's how these stories go. But in today's time, to have the younger artisans to do it is what is challenging. So we do have a school. We constantly motivate them, and our clients appreciate it. So that's why we are one of the few organizations who are still doing this, where other people are using the CAD and all the softwares to do the business, which is called the fast fashion of jewelry. And that's exactly the opposite concept of our brand.
Absolutely. And so Priyanka, maybe you can share a little bit around changes in terms of, here we talk a lot now around sustainability, social responsibility. And I know at the Jewelry Edit, that is an important focus of ours. I think sustainability is a misnomer, but certainly working towards slow fashion and being responsible and thoughtful about where we source and how we make our jewelry. So what changes have you seen there in India?
I think they're the same. I think that's pretty much a universal language across fashion and jewelry. Again, I feel these are terms often used loosely. I think they have sort of become marketing buzzwords. But I also think consumers are now smart. They know when to separate and they know, which brand is really walking the talk, so as to speak. So I think those are kind of they're universal sort of moves for the industry on the whole. I think the same debates that are happening, whether it's the lab grown versus the natural, the heritage versus the modern ways. I think what the fashion industry is facing globally, there is a trickle down effect in India in a lot of ways. Of course, for India in terms of fashion and jewelry, the difference is that so much of our technique is based on the hand, and the hands of these workers. So I think that really is the differentiator. But I think these are conversations all brands are having and trying to communicate with their consumers. So I don't see much difference in that. I just see, of course, for us, there's a stronger legacy and there's actually a lot more to lose. If we go the fast fashion or the fast jewelry sort of way, there's a lot to lose. There are industries, and the handcrafted industry is unregulated. There are no exact numbers at the moment, but I think the pandemic really showed how many people were impacted by the loss of business across sectors when India's hubs were shut down for very, very long, since I'm not sure you're aware, but we had some of the strictest lockdowns in the world for those few years. And I think it brought to light how important work was for the sector. And I think that also has changed. One of the interesting things that came out of the pandemic was this focus on homegrown. There became more of a pride in homegrown labels and supporting homegrown labels. And I think that's a good movement for the Indian fashion, craft, jewelry industries. So I think that's been a big change. But I think we have the most to lose. If we go the ways other countries have, unfortunately.
Well, thank you for your incredible time. I have one more question for each of you. I'll give you a second to think about it. I'd love you to, the three of you are all icons in your own way in terms of what you've contributed to the fashion and jewelry scene in India. It's been such a privilege for me to have you all speaking and sharing your knowledge. I'm sure the audience are going to just enjoy this conversation so much. I think it's been very nuanced. I've learned a lot. There's a lot of personal touches to these stories. So I really appreciate it. But I'd love it if each of you could name maybe one of your favorite pieces of jewelry that you own and wear. And that's, I'm sure for all of you, I can only imagine your jewelry boxes are filled with a lot of beautiful pieces. But maybe you can name something. And because as we wrap up, icons of Indian jewelry, there's a lot to talk about. But at the end of the day, it's very personal. And it's something that I think, as I said, is all part of our DNA, and we feel it in a different way, I think, sometimes to a lot of other people. Jewelry is a very important part of our lives. So I'd love if you could all share a piece. I can start by saying that this piece from Gem Palace, which is actually a beautiful ring that I picked up in Jaipur, is one of mine, and it's all individually set stones and a snake motif, which is beautiful and meaningful to me. But maybe we can start with you, Usha, if you want to tell us about one of your favorite pieces.
Okay. But, before I do that, I just want to add a little bit that, in India, all our ancient texts say that gemstones have a soul. Every stone has a soul. So in the whole debate versus lab-grown versus naturally mined natural diamonds, the diamond that has lain in the earth for 1 million years comes out with a soul, whereas the one that's grown in the lab is a soulless stone. So having said that, I think one of my favorite pieces of jewelry is something I got from my great-grandmother. Actually, it's a very traditional South Indian ring. We call it Nelly, which is, it's like a V-shaped ring set with diamonds, rubies, and emeralds with two little parrots. It's a V-shaped ring with two little parrots outside. There was one generation that was melting down and, refashioning old jewelry, but luckily in my house that didn't happen. So I was fortunate enough to get that. So that's really something very special for me.
Wonderful. Okay, Siddharth, tell me, and you have access to, gosh, a lot of great jewelry. This is a hard question for you.
Yeah, like I said, I'm blessed, and I don't take it lightly. I know it's great responsibility to be carrying my father's legacy, and especially to fill in his shoes. So my favorite piece is definitely one of the pieces my dad had created. What Usha ji was talking about, a sarpech. For the audience who don't know, the sarpech really means sar means head, and sarpech is like a head turban pin. So that's one of my favorite pieces. He had done it when I was 19 years old, with using these beautiful Colombian emeralds with rose-cut diamonds, and the same concept of front and back in anticipation of my wedding.
Yes, still waiting for that.
That's a whole other panel. We'll have you back tomorrow for that one.
So that definitely, it's not, like we were talking about, like the jewelry pieces, they just don't carry the value, but what's most important is the emotional value. And it has great sense of emotional value for me, because unfortunately my dad's not around anymore, but somehow he lives on in that piece, and I can't wait to wear that piece the day I finally decide to get married. But yes, so I would say that is one of those pieces which is very close to my heart, and probably I can share a picture with you later
Love that.
for you to see it.
And Priyanka, with all your great fashion sense and years at Vogue and family, I'm sure you have some great pieces too.
So, actually one of my favorite pieces, and also one of the pieces I get the most response on. So in Indian big festivities and weddings, often you're gifted guineas, gold guineas. So my mother at her wedding got a bunch of gold guineas, and she said, and her philosophy was like, I refuse to let this just like lie in a locker. So she made a pair of earrings and a necklace out of gold guineas, which she designed herself. She has more of an affinity to yellow, sort of chunkier gold jewelry. And I wear those pieces. I was looking for them, actually. They're not with me here, but I wear them all the time. And I've had friends copy them. I've had jewelers ask me about them because they're just a very simple pair of gold guineas. And I love that philosophy, right? It goes back to the idea that we don't want pieces in the locker room. We don't want pieces that are just there. So that maybe that's our patience to come out, wedding or no wedding, So and I love that I can wear it, every day. I take it wherever I travel, and it's lovely because it's something she designed on her own. She's not a designer. She just sort of put it together with a local craftsman. And it's something that I'm going to pass on to my children. And in fact, when my sister got married, she made a couple of pairs herself of using guineas in a different way. So
incredible. Well, I think what all of these stories show is how personal jewelry is, and it's not about going in and buying something because it's a trend or because there's a brand name attached to it. It's about a feeling and a connection that you have. So I really appreciate you sharing that, and I appreciate having this very diverse panel with diverse voices from different parts of India as well, which is nice. Diversity has many different layers to it, and you've all contributed, incredibly to this conversation. Thank you. I know that New York City Jewelry Week and their audience are going to love this. So thank you, everyone.
Thank
you for having
Thank you,
us.
Rosena.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.